little touchy. If the plane crash, that's a hell of a thing. You lost your loved ones. That's a hell of a thing. But now, you got to go hire you a lawyer, and it'd be about 12 years before you get a salary. And the lawyer get 40% of it. And they'll say, well, was the pilot drunk? We ain't gonna let them, the union say, they ain't gonna take no drug test. Greyhound had a bus, went off a cliff at the Grand Canyon, and went 12 miles down in the embankment. And the president of Greyhound showed up, and he looked down and said, I can tell from the skid marks the driver was high. And also looking down there, I can tell nobody survived it, so there's no need in us trying to send a rescue crew down there and endanger their life. They all dead. And for all you family members, just tell us what they was worth. We writing checks right now. Now that sounds a little cold, but it's better than waiting 12 years. Now I know I've been married 44 years. My wife died of a Greyhound. That would be a tragedy to me. And you know, the funeral and all that, a grieving husband, but with a big old $2 million check in your hip pocket can make them tears a little bit sweeter. But there's nothing more nasty than bitter tears coming out your eyes, dripping in your mouth. But tears take nasty when you ain't happy. Y'all know that. See, these are a lot of things don't nobody want to talk about in public. Like y'all don't want to talk about when y'all go out and eat all that old bad soul food, you got to fart and belch at the same time and can't do it. Nobody want to talk about it. But that's God's work. God do that, because that's the only time you be hollering, oh God, oh God, oh God, help me Jesus. So listen, we really appreciate you all being here. We're gonna move this. I want you to sit back, enjoy yourself, have fun. Nobody's here to convince you of nothing. There's only one paper, the New York Times, ran this article. What's the date on that? What's the date? New York Times.
June 14, 2003.
I'm sorry.
June 14, 2003.
And what's that headline say?
Hussein's image is banned in public except on money.
In June of this year, they printed new money in Iraq with Hussein's picture on it. So y'all run around thinking they enemies. Huh? Did you hear me? And the only paper that ran the story with a picture of the money was the New York Times. Now, if there's anything that'll make me believe you're alive, is see new money come out after you're supposed to be dead with your picture on. And so somewhere I say to you, there's a lot of tricks that go down. And we just think everybody that's sitting there, oh man. Oh man. Do white folk do look alike to me? What? You over there eating with your queen? Oh yeah. You talking about a white woman, I'm in love. That's the queen. Oh yeah, I go way better. That Queen Elizabeth makes it. But that's my type of white woman. She makes $360 million every 24 hours. Gets interest on my money. Now them be white folks. What I like about them, they don't lie. They be real. They tell you we going to war to protect our interests. As an interest. See, a lot of sisters, you be mad at white women because niggas be trying to marry them. Now, I ain't never had a white woman. I like to follow. Watch them. Because white woman, 3 things that survive everything. A rat, a roach, and a white woman. Hey, she survived Dracula, Wolfman. I'm still trying to find out. I ain't no fool. I went to the movie and I saw King Kong. He had that white woman on top of the Empire State Building. He died and she's still alive. I don't know how that white woman got away. watching a roach. You know how smart they are, they don't come out till your friends get there. And they just come out, they just be cool, they just be shit. And you ain't gonna say nothing because you think I didn't see it. I saw that roach before it come up because I got roaches in my house. Ain't nothing wrong with a roach. If you don't like roaches, clean up the damn house. Clean up the roaches leave. And I don't know why y'all scared of roaches. They can't eat much. They can't get on the top of you and take the pop top off and eat your greens. Just leave a little food for them. So anyway, we ready to start now. Come on, love you. One and only, Mr. D.Gregory. Was not to be on at this time, but I hope that I can set the tone for this most important information that you're going to hear. Why? Because this community of Memphis, Tennessee, Shelby County, and even the state of Tennessee and our nation needs to understand the truth of how our founding president was murdered right here in this city. That's right. And who was involved in it. When we thought about having our convention in this city 35 years ago and 4 months, when our founding president was at Mason's Temple, and on that next day, April 4th, he was murdered. I understand that. Murdered. A lot of people die and get killed. That's right. But he was murdered.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was.
Last night I said something, I'm going to say it again, and then I want to introduce one of the gentlemen who I have asked to moderate, because beyond D.Gregory, he has worked for over 20 years on this case. Most of these gentlemen up here have written books on conspiracies and on have researched information. Just about all of them have. I'm one of the few who hasn't. But because that they are experts in this topic. Last night I said that my mother, for those of you who do not know, chose not to come to this convention. Not because she doesn't like Memphis. Not because she's afraid to come to Memphis. She came to Memphis on April 8th, 4 days after my father was killed, to lead a march that he was to have led. And she brought my older sister, my younger brother, and myself. So it had nothing to do with she was afraid and doesn't like Memphis. But she and all of us as family members understand what my father and others have said, and that is, ye shall know the truth.
Yes.
And the truth shall set you free.
All right, girl.
And what I'm saying is that many of us, or some of us, have visited the Civil Rights Museum. The Civil Rights Museum does a great job of capturing much of the history of the modern civil rights movement. But yet when it comes to the assassination, what seems to be fostered is that Martin Luther King Jr. was killed by a lone assassin named James Earl Ray,
All right. Yeah.
who was actually an unknown patsy. Does anybody know what a patsy is?
Yeah.
Someone who the government just sends around to various places and has nothing whatsoever to do. Doesn't even know that they were doing what they said they were doing. Knew nothing about it. And all I'm saying is that at the end of the day, the museum implies that James Earl Ray was the killer. One day, in the not too distant future,
Come on, Mr. President.
we're going to have to correct that untruth that's there.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right.
And after you hear what you hear this evening, can you understand my passion? Now, we're not trying to prosecute. We did a trial, civil suit against Lloyd Jowers, who had said on ABC that he was involved in the assassination. It was on ABC one evening a few years back, and Dr. William Pepper will tell us that. And nobody else ran the story. They wouldn't even investigate it. Why? Because they didn't want you to know the truth. Now, let me stop there.
That's all right.
Bring up Dr. Pepper, who will moderate and share himself. This man has given over 20 years of his life on this case. And guess what? Much of it was done with his own expense. He was the attorney. And I say was because James Earl Ray is deceased now. For James Earl Ray, he's not the first attorney. There were 3 or 4 before him. And he's going to give all of that history. It's very important for us to understand that. And each one of these men, there probably are some women who have some information also. In fact, a lot of women witnesses. But it happens to be a panel of all males today. Each one of these men have some very specific information. We'll be hearing from each of them. Dr. Pepper has written several books. One of the first books on the assassination was called Orders to Kill. Orders to kill. The order came down from the top that this leader had to be removed. You notice there's no, at least visible, we don't see media. There may be media here.
That's right.
But
I understand.
if the media really wanted to understand and know what was happening, although there may be some who are in the media who are on this panel, but there's no media really here because they don't really want the masses of people to know the truth.
That's right.
There may be some written press here, and we thank God for those who are here who are willing to tell the story. You got to tell the story over and over and over. And let me add one other thing. See, evil is not black or white.
Right.
Because there are black folk just as there are white folk who are evil. There are black folk just as well as white folk who are involved in the killing of Martin Luther King. Don't believe everybody loves Martin Luther King Jr.
That's right. Teach.
So at this time, and I cannot thank any of these gentlemen enough, but certainly Dr. William Pepper, attorney. Dr. William Pepper is a professor at Oxford. And also, he travels all over the world, back and forth between here and London. Dr. William Pepper, as I said, over 20 years has worked on this case, and most of that time, he certainly neglected his family, his children. Not intentionally, but because he was passionate about the work of pursuing justice. So at this time, let me present our moderator for the evening, Dr. William Pepper.
dropping the things all over the place here. Thank you. Mr. President, members of the board of S.C.L.C, brothers Gregory, whom I've known over the generations, it seems, since we first met connected with this case. I come to you today somewhat weary because I had to go to London on Tuesday. My son was called to the bar, the Lincoln's Inn, and that means he's a barrister. As I'm also a barrister in England, but an attorney here. Then I had to go to Madrid and on to Caracas. And I've been in Caracas for the last few days. I spent a fair amount of time in Caracas, and I bring to you the greetings of the President of Venezuela, Hugo Chavez Frias. President Chavez is someone who also receives the kind of media non-coverage and ill coverage, mal-coverage that has graced so many people in the movement for human freedom and justice and liberty, as he attempts to rectify the wrongs of an oligarchic rule of his country for over 100 years by meeting the needs of a poor, impoverished population, 80% of the people of Venezuela. And if any man is a living witness to the legacy of Martin King, who was one of his heroes, one of his idols, in this world today, it is Chavez, the president of Venezuela. And so he carries on amidst great American opposition. His great American attempts to bring down his government. Almost a year ago, there was a coup that was plotted in Washington in the American embassy in Caracas, and it lasted all of 24 hours because people from the streets of Caracas, 1 million strong, descended on the palace and demanded the return of their elected president. And the coup leaders had to back down in ignominy, and Chavez is still in power. So he is very much in the tradition of Martin King, and that's why I choose to spend as much time as I do trying to sustain his leadership and to keep him where he can be an effective force in the world, not just Venezuela, but in the world. It's an example of a leader who can take his people, use their natural resources, and raise the quality and standard of life in the country without the IMF and without the World Bank and without the domination of the United States through all of its free trade manipulations. And that's what's going on in Venezuela today. Now to Martin King, he was, of course, the most unusual prophetic figure that, in my view, this country has ever produced. I knew him only the last year of his life, when I was a mere wisp of a lad. And I met him when I came back from Vietnam. I was a journalist in Vietnam and came back and had published a piece in a magazine called Ramparts. It was called The Children of Vietnam, and it showed photographs of burned and mutilated bodies, most of whom were under 15 years of age. He saw that piece and decided he wanted to talk about the war. He'd been instinctively against that kind of exercise, military exercise, forever. And instinctively linked in his own mind and soul, really, with the poor people of this earth. So we met, and I opened the files to him, and at one point on the way to Cambridge for Vietnam Summer, launching in 1968, he wept because he was overcome with this this fear and feeling of remorse at what his country was doing. Soon after that, as you probably know, as part of your history, he delivered a speech. And this was in 1967, in April 4, 1967. He delivered the speech at Riverside Church in New York. And in that speech, he said how sad he was that this country and its government had become the greatest purveyors of violence on the face of the earth. And he was left with no alternative but to oppose his government and this adventure in Vietnam. And he did that to the end of his life. He campaigned against the war, he participated in the movement to end the war, and he became, on that count, a very serious threat to the power structure of this country and the transnational corporations who were benefiting enormously from the waging of this war in Vietnam and have benefited from the waging of every war before and since. So Martin King became a very dangerous person because of his position on the war. His opposition and his credibility was attacked across the board. The media, including the infamous New York Times, virtually labeled him a traitor. He lost enormous support in the civil rights movement. Civil rights leaders turned their backs on him. He stood in many times alone. They couldn't understand why he was going against this government that had done so much in the name of civil rights on the domestic front. He had a vision and a view of the world, and he said liberty and social justice is an international problem, and I yearn for that fate to be imposed upon the wretched of the earth, wherever they may be. So he continued that struggle. And that was pretty clearly one of the reasons why he was killed, because gradually his opposition was going to affect the bottom line of major transnational corporations who were involved in huge construction projects, huge oil and energy provisions to the government of the United States, and the weapons manufacturers, of course, who were always there. And the end of the war would mean, of course, the end of that business. So he became then a persona non grata in terms of that issue in America. But it was more than that. He thought it was time during that last year of his life to launch his campaign on behalf of the poor in America. He thought it was time to return the government's resources and assistance to the poor people of America who were being denied programs that were being cut out of the budget because the war economy would not allow for that. So he then began to develop a Poor People's Campaign. And that was going to culminate in the gatherings of masses of poor people in America in the streets of Washington, where they would not march, but where they would come to stay. And then they would go every day up to visit their congressmen and their senators and ask that these programs be put back into effect. Well, in the latter course of my work in this case, it became evident to me from documents that were given to me and interviews I was able to have with military intelligence sourced people that they feared that mob in Washington. They saw a 1930s MacArthur incident all over again, where General MacArthur, you may remember, was called upon to shoot demonstrating American veterans who were trying to get their pay. They saw this in hundreds of thousands of people on the streets of Washington, and they didn't have enough troops to put down what they were convinced would ultimately be a rebellion. They were convinced the Second American Revolution was going to take place in 1968 on the streets of Washington, and that they could not put them down. Westmoreland wanted 200,000 more troops in Vietnam. They didn't have those. They didn't have the available forces. They were afraid the capital would be overrun. And that was the second reason why Martin King was killed and why he was never going to be allowed to bring that mob of people, of poor, wretched people, white, black, Hispanic, Asian, to Washington. So that was the underlying motive as it emerged from the work that I did. But when he was assassinated on the 4th of April, 1968, 1 year to the day after the Riverside speech, I came here for the Memorial March, as did many others, and went on to Atlanta for the funeral. Bob Kennedy invited a few of us to come up to his suite, and I think Benjamin Spock, the baby doctor, maybe Julian Bond went on up there, and I just turned my back and went away. I'd had my fill of politics. I had actually handled, as a kid, one of Bobby Kennedy's campaigns and had come not to like him very much. But I didn't know the Bobby Kennedy in 4 years later. This was in '64. I didn't know him in '68, and I now regret that I didn't actually have that last session with him. But in any event, I walked away from politics for a whole period of 9 years in terms of this case and other things. And then Ralph Abernathy said, why don't we go up, I'd like you to go up and interview this man, James Earl Ray. This was in late 1977. And I didn't know anything about the case. Dick had been involved in it with Mark Lane. They had published. Mark was James's lawyer at the time. And anyway, the interview was eventually arranged after I had a chance to do some reading and find out what it was all about. Because I said, Ralph, what are you talking about? Isn't this guy guilty? Do you believe he's not guilty? I mean, I assumed they had the right guy. Like everyone assumed they had the right guy. Well, we spent 5 hours with James that day, and I interrogated him rather brutally at times. And Abernathy and I came away from that meeting with a clear view that James Earl Ray was not the shooter, did not kill Martin Luther King. We didn't know what other role he might have played, but he definitely wasn't the shooter. That was clear. And that just emerged in the course of an interrogation, which showed that he knew nothing about guns, that he was embarrassed by the fact that he used to carry a pistol with only 5 bullets in it and the firing pin chamber empty. And when pressed on that, he eventually revealed that he had shot himself in the foot once, and he was very embarrassed by that. He was a petty thief, and he'd go in, and he was an escaped convict, of course, and he was on the run, capable of being manipulated, trying desperately to get out of North America after he escaped from prison in April of '67. He was trying to get out, and he met a chap called Raoul, no one believed existed. But who definitely existed, who does exist, is alive and well today. And he met this fellow in Montreal in a bar. The guy promised him travel papers, assistance in getting out of the country. But first, he had to do some jobs for him inside the United States. So he convinced James to come back into the United States. Then he moved him around the country and kept him on a string, giving him small amounts of money until he was ready to go. Well, an example of the treatment of the New York Times in this type of case and the issue of Raoul, there was a select committee on assassinations going on at the time, 1978. One of the witnesses was Jerry Ray, James's brother. Mark had been representing Jerry Ray. They disqualified him, so it was agreed I would come on and represent Jerry Ray at that time. Now, I represented Jerry for those hearings with Flo Kennedy, who was a woman lawyer, associate of mine from New York. You know Flo Kennedy, some of you, who died recently. Well, in the course of those hearings, the day before Jerry was to testify, the New York Times ran a front-page article, column 1, on an investigation that the Times had conducted along with the FBI and the House Select Committee, and without a doubt, it showed that the Ray brothers had robbed a bank in Alton, Illinois, and that's where James Earl Ray got his traveling money. There was no Raoul. He got it from that bank robbery. That was on July 12th, I think, 1967. And they ran this piece by Wendell Rawls Jr. Whole big piece, column 1, front page of the Times. I said to Jerry, it's crazy. Jerry said, well, I went back there once and tried to get myself up. I said, well, let's try to do that again. So I called the sheriff of Alton, and I called the president of the bank. And I said, I represent Jerry Ray. Obviously, you guys are looking for him to try him for this crime. He's prepared to come back. He's tried to do this once before, but he's serious now because the New York Times has written about it. He's prepared to come back, give himself up, you try him. Both the sheriff and the president of the bank said to me, what are you talking about? Ray brothers have never been suspects in this crime. We know who robbed this bank. The guys who robbed the quarter taxi cab company with the proceeds. We just don't have enough evidence to get them. So what do you think? I said, well, why would you tell the Times investigators, the FBI investigators, the Select Committee, congressional investigators, that this is what happened? Why would you consider doing something like that? He said, what are you talking about? These guys were totally nonplussed. Nobody has ever talked to us. Nobody has ever interviewed us. Not the Congress, not the FBI, and certainly not the New York Times. So that is an example of blatant, explicit example of making up a whole story out of a cloth that has no truth whatsoever behind it, but putting it out there so the people, the masses of people who read that paper will understand the truth, because that's the part of the news that's fit to print, so to speak. Well, James unnerved me enough in that interview in terms of responding to questions to let me believe that I didn't know really what had happened, and neither did any of us. So I began then in 1978, which is now 25 years ago, going into Memphis as time allowed and finding witnesses and talking to them. And I started that in 78, went until, he interviewed James many times in the course of that, and finally kept asking me to help him on appeal after Mark had gone from the area to Washington, and he was doing his own appeals, per se, and his own applications. And I said no. For 10 years I said no, because I had to be totally convinced that he had no knowing role in the assassination of Martin King. So it was only then in 1988 that I agreed to become his lawyer, and we tried to get him post-conviction relief and get a trial. We went all the way to the Supreme Court, and we lost each step of the way. And for the last 10 years of his life, we tried every means to do that. We tried, we had a television trial that was dismissed as entertainment, even though there was no script. It was bitterly contested. A New York federal judge, jurors from all over the country, held right here in Memphis, sponsored by Thames Television of England and HBO. Took a jury 7.5 hours to find James O'Reilly not guilty, with a fraction of the evidence that would emerge after 1992. The trial was held in 1993. The prosecutor, just for your own interest, was a man called Hickman Ewing Jr. Anybody know that name, Hickman Ewing Jr.? Yeah. Hickman Ewing Jr. was a former U.S. attorney in this area, and he was Ken Starr's number 2 quite a period of time on the Whitewater investigations. And he couldn't believe that a jury would find James O'Reilly not guilty. And when the verdict was read, he slumped down. I actually thought something was going on with his heart. But he survived to go on to bigger and better things. 92, 93, we had the television trial. It was called entertainment, and it was dismissed. But one of the things that happened as a result of the television trial was that it brought witnesses forward. Witnesses came who were frightened, who never had come forward before. And a number of those witnesses pointed a finger at a local man called Lloyd Jowers. And Mr. Garrison has represented Lloyd Jowers for a lot of years. And we had clearly enough evidence to have Jowers indicted, because he was obviously involved in the assassination, and the witnesses put him very much in the frame. One of them, a woman called Betty Spates, in fact was his lover at the time, and told the story of coming into Jim's Grill, which he ran on Main Street, and not seeing Lloyd in the front, going through to the kitchen, being surprised that the kitchen door was closed, because it's usually open, not seeing him in the kitchen, thinking maybe he was out fooling around with some women in the bushes in the back of the place, but seeing the back door of the grill open, in the kitchen out to the bushes. The bushes overlooked. You wouldn't know it today because of what they've done with the museum. They just wiped out that whole crime scene. But there were bushes and they overlooked Lorraine Motel, where Martin King was staying. And as she approached the door, she heard a shot. As she got to the door, she saw Lloyd running, breakneck speed, white as a ghost, carrying a rifle, still smoking. Comes in, breaks down the rifle, and says, "You wouldn't do anything to hurt me, Betty, would you?" And she said, "Of course not, Lord." Threw the slug down the toilet in the back there, and stopped up the toilet, wrapped the gun in a cloth, and brought it out and put it under the counter for its later disposal. So there was that kind of evidence, and the cab driver whom he showed the rifle to, and all. There was enough evidence to indict him. We tried for a long time to get that before a grand jury, and we were blocked at every turn by the District Attorney General. Wayne Chastain, or some of you may know, or Memphians will know, and certainly was co-counsel with me in this case. Wayne would sit 2 weeks outside the grand jury room trying to get in there to get this evidence before them, and we were not able to do it. Jowers, thinking that he was going to be indicted, was trying to push the envelope, and Mr. Garrison will tell you the story of how he went and tried to negotiate a plea for immunity. And of course, not only did they not want to give him immunity, they didn't even want to talk to him. They never talked to Jowers. Never even, imagine that, never even interviewed him. Didn't want to talk to him at all. So that all was pushed away, but Jowers kept thinking he was going to get indicted. So he went on this Primetime Live program that Sam Donaldson ran. And it was run, was an ABC program. Donaldson is one of the more independent people who's had to be silenced in the networks. And he put Jowers on. Jowers told the story. That was an ABC. It was on a nighttime, primetime program. The next morning, it was silence across the land. That program, as a news program, was not reported. The account was not reported by any television station, including ABC, including the network that had televised it the night before. So it was just lost. So we continued on putting together the picture. Betty Spates kept her secret for all of those years, for 24 years. Finally, one night in December 1992, she broke down and she told me this story. Other witnesses came forward as a result of the television trial who identified Raul from his operations in Houston. He was a gun runner, mob guy, but also with intelligence ties from Portuguese intelligence when they brought him in here in 1960. And so he was the link between the Marcello organization in New Orleans and American military and Central Intelligence. So she identified this guy, Raul, and the guns that used to come in. So we began to put those pieces together. And at the end of the day, a picture started to emerge of a mob killing. A contract killing, taken on by the Carlos Marcello organization in New Orleans, and subbed to a man called Frank Liberto, who ran a warehouse, food warehouse in the city. Now, Liberto's name had been in the frame, but also ignored for many years, because Johnny McFerrin, one of the most courageous citizens of this state, lives up in Somerville and runs a gas station and a small store in Somerville. John McFerrin happened to be in Frank Liberto's warehouse around 5 o'clock, 4:45 on April 4, 1968. And he's going about pulling his things from the shelves that he'll take up to his store, as he always did. And he hears Liberto on the telephone. And on the telephone, Liberto says, "Shoot the son of a bitch when he comes out on the balcony. And don't bring your ass around here. Go to New Orleans, get the rest of your money from my brother." Now, McFerrin knew Liberto was a mob guy. So he assumed that was some kind of mob operation. He didn't want anything to do with it. He gets his shopping done, heads home, and as he gets home, he hears about the assassination of Martin Luther King, having been shot on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. And it just hits him what he has heard earlier, within an hour or so of the killing. So, McFerrin, 2 days later, is convinced to tell the story to the FBI and the local police, which he does under ruthless grilling, stays consistently with it, and has to this day stayed with that story. And he is not believed. He's ignored. But the name Liberto came firmly into the frame. It was injected by 2 other people later on in the investigation, a woman owned a cafe where Liberto used to stop on his way home. And during the congressional hearings, around the same time we were involved in those and preparing Ray Jerry to testify, Frank Liberto would come in and he'd have his coffee there. He'd sit down with Mrs. Whitlock. And the hearings came on the television screen. The congressional hearings came on the screen. And at one time, Liberto blurted out, you know, I had that son of a bitch killed. And Mrs. Whitlock said, what? What are you saying? She said, yeah, I had him killed. And he got very silent. She told her son, Nathan, about this, and Nathan sometime later confronted Liberto. What are you talking to my mother about that stuff for? I thought that guy in jail was taking all the credit for killing King. What do you mean you had him killed? And he confirmed again to young Nate that that's what happened. And but then got very nervous and told him that it was none of his business and he should keep his mouth shut. So the Liberto involvement, there was enough evidence for it. He also knew Mr. Jowers. Jowers owed him a very big favor. And Jowers described receiving the money from Liberto and holding onto the gun, taking care of the gun, and doing what he was supposed to do. One of the reasons Betty never came forward was because she was actually convinced that it was Jowers who had done the shooting. And it wasn't Jowers, of course, who had done the shooting, but she was convinced that he was. Now, in 30 days of trial, in 1999, in this city, the King family sued Mr. Lloyd Jowers and others. We tried the case for 30 days. There were over 70 witnesses. At the end of 59 minutes, the jury came back and found that there was a conspiracy to kill Martin King, involving agents of the government of the United States, the state of Tennessee, the city of Memphis, and of course Mr. Lloyd Jowers and other individuals. It was an astounding verdict. Most of the trial found the press in the hallway. The general counsel of Court TV is a personal friend of mine. And when I told him we were going to do this trial, I said, well, gee, Bill, we're going to have to cover that. It's one of the most important cases of the 20th century, maybe the history of America. They really show Americans how their government operates under these kinds of circumstances, because there has always been the rumor of assassination squads and hit teams that get rid of uncomfortable people in this country. That's one of the things that worried my children when I got involved in this case, and they started getting threatening phone calls, and my little 5-year-old would pick up the telephone, and I thought that was a bit too much, and that was one of the reasons I took a position, and we moved to Cambridge in England. So most of this work I had to do coming back and forth. I was not resident in the United States. I was raising a young family in England. But in any event, Doug thought this would be a great instructive lesson for the American people. Well, you know where the court TV cameras were during most of the trial? They were out in the hallway. When Mrs. King testified, they came in, and when members of the King family testified, and Andy Young testified, they came in. And otherwise, they stayed outside of the home. Now, all of that evidence is on the website of the King Center, thekingcenter.com. So, and it's I don't want to belabor it. I can give you the high points of it, but it's all there if anyone wants to just pull it up and read it. It's 4,000 pages of testimony, and I've given Reverend Taylor a copy of the transcript of the closing remarks to the jury, which put out all the evidence, and I'm suggesting maybe you duplicate that and give it as a handout, because that sets out the evidence. Basically, the killing was a mob killing. The shooter was a Memphis Police Department officer. He was hired, he was paid, and it's been covered up ever since. What happened was that Martin King's room was to be in 202 down in the courtyard area of the Lorraine Motel. Despite all the rumors to the contrary, Martin King never stayed overnight at the Lorraine Motel before. He went there for meetings with community people who were uncomfortable about coming into white establishments, so he would take a room there, but he never stayed there. And as that's explained by Reverend Lawson and others, that was because they were desegregating a lot of the white-owned hotels, and they felt an obligation to stay in these hotels. So he would stay in a variety of places, primarily in later years at the Holiday Inn Rivermont. Now, his suite at the Holiday Inn Rivermont was bugged. Every room in it, including the bathroom, was bugged. The balcony was bugged. And there were, as I recall, something like 72 microphones hidden throughout that suite. And there was a van that was parked opposite, and so they had him continually under electronic surveillance, although they denied that. Now, how do I know that? I know that because when we were preparing for the television trial, a sympathetic investigator of the District Attorney General's office came to me and said, you know, I was with intelligence back in those days, and I was assigned to two federal agents, and I had to work with them on the surveillance of Martin King. I said, oh, really? Well, how did that work? And he not only told me how it worked, he told me where the microphones were laid out, how the whole system worked, and it became very clear. He testified at the television trial. He became then subject to great harassment, eventually was forced to leave Memphis and try to find other work, and he had to abandon law enforcement because the FBI had blacklisted him as a result of his testimony at this television trial. So he stayed in other places, but he was going this last time to stay at the Lorraine Motel. Did stay overnight, came on the 3rd of April, was supposed to be in room 202. Somehow that room got changed. Somehow that room got changed. There was a phone call, there was a visit, there was a request, supposedly from an S.C.L.C. person, that that room should be changed. And he should be given the balcony room overlooking the swimming pool, which of course in April was a very attractive sight, with a lot of water and a lot of nonsense is what it was. But they put him up in that balcony room, which was a very exposed room. And he was ideally situated for the hit from the bushes, from the brush area, which was also an elevated area. It's important to understand that. Raoul took James into Memphis after having him buy a gun, throwdown gun, in Birmingham, Alabama. James drove the gun to the outskirts of Memphis, turned it over to him on April 3rd, and then was told to be at the Main Street hotel rooming house the next day, where he was. Then he was told to take a room. He did under another name, but then he was kept out of the room all afternoon. He was sent out of there. And finally, he was told just to go away and go to a movie or something, because Raoul was going to meet with some of these gun runners. What happened in that afternoon was that around 20 minutes past 5, James came down and sat in the car and realized that there was a flat tire. The spare tire was flat and he should have it repaired. So he drove the car around 5:30, 5:35 or so, away from the scene. It was parked right in front of the hotel, of the rooming house, to get the tire changed. He was waiting at a garage to get it changed. It was becoming too long. He heard the sirens at that point. This was just at the time of the killing. He then started to drive back around, and as he came back around, he saw police blocking off the streets. Being an escaped convict, every time he saw a cop, he'd go in the opposite direction. So he just took off at that point in time, went to Atlanta, and then headed from Atlanta up to Canada, where he eventually would get out of the country. But he left the scene of the crime sometime about a half hour or more before the actual killing. Now, there were 2 eyewitnesses to him leaving. Nobody ever heard of these eyewitnesses. There were 2 witnesses. 2 guys were in Jim's grill who were drinking. One was with the Corps of Engineers. They came out, they saw the car. One guy was inspecting him, the other one back in to get his jacket. He came out again, and as they started walking up the street, they got to the 2nd block and were about to cross, and here comes this Mustang right around the corner. It was James going off to get the tire repaired. These guys gave statements to this effect that were totally ignored. Never appeared. I found them buried in feet after feet of piles of paper when we were doing the research. But they gave these statements, but no one ever raised them. There were actual eyewitnesses to to the man leaving the scene of the crime. But that of course, that was buried. In 1995, after I published Orders to Kill, January of 1995, after I published Orders to Kill, I heard that there was an army unit in Memphis. Not just the usual military intelligence, they were all over the place, but that there was a special unit in Memphis, an Alpha team, Alpha 184 team. That was a 6-man unit. And then in that team there were 2 snipers. And I'd heard about that in the past and dismissed it. But then a local reporter named Steve Tompkins, who eventually, very quickly went on to other things, wrote an article in the Memphis Commercial Appeal on the infiltration of the black civil rights movement going back to before the First World War, after the Russian Revolution. There was this great fear on the part of the American government after the Russian Revolution that black people, with their disenchantment and their anger and their poverty and neglect, were a fertile breeding ground for communist movement in the United States. So they immediately began to infiltrate churches, organizations, anywhere where blacks congregated. And Americans knew nothing about this, of course, for a very long time. But even Dr. King's parents were under surveillance as they grew by military intelligence in the United States. So there was this tradition. So Tompkins did this whole piece. It was to be 8 installments. They boiled it down, ultimately, it was controversial, boiled it down to one large article. I read that article, and buried in that article there was one tiny paragraph. It said there was an Alpha 184 Special Forces unit in Memphis on the 4th of April, and no one has ever explained why they were there. So when I saw that, I went to see Tompkins, who was then working for the governor. He'd left journalism. He was doing some work for the governor of the state at that time. And I said, I want you to help me. Got a guy in jail, as you know. We're trying to get him a trial. I read what you wrote. And he said, Bill, I was 18 months of my life. It was pure hell. These guys kill you where you stand, your wife, children. I don't want anything to do with it. Eventually, I kept banging away at him, and eventually he agreed he would help. So for about 1.5 years, he would go back and forth to meet with the two of the snipers. They were presently in Mexico, as they still are, and he would interview them on questions that they refused to meet with me, but they would talk to him. He also had a naval intelligence background. They trusted him. He had interviewed them on the other story. He never betrayed their confidence. He would give them my questions. They would answer back to them. Then a whole other picture started to come into play. Whole other picture. And then it became clear to me what the scenario was. The scenario was that there was to be a mob contract to kill Martin King, and that effectively did it. The Army didn't do it. There was a backup unit in Memphis, and one sniper was on the roof of the Illinois Central Railroad building, and the other was up on a water tower. And they both had spotters, and at their briefing at 5:30 in the morning at Camp Shelby, where they came from, they were shown 2 photographs. One of Martin King and one of Andrew Young. And these were their targets. Each sniper had one. And they were told these were enemies of the state, and that they were communists, and they had to be eliminated. They were going to bring revolutionary misery to America. And they were given that. That was the story. And they were specialized professional soldiers, and they believed it, and they just followed their orders. They left Memphis, and they drove here, and they were put in their positions by an intelligence agent personnel who was their host, who greeted them. In the course of their time here, they spoke to a Memphis Police Department inspector named Sam Evans. And he gave them the whole layout of the hotel and the room layout and all of that information. He also gave them radio frequencies. They talked with one other local intelligence official. for information as well, and they were told that friendlies would not be wearing ties.
That's right.
The friendlies would not be wearing ties. And they were to keep that in mind in case their extensive shooting broke out. Now, what was the scenario? I think probably it's pretty clear they were a backup. If they didn't know anything about the guy on the ground, when the guy on the ground did shoot and hit Dr. King, they were amazed. They said, my goodness, what happened? One guy thought the other must have shot first. They were told to disengage and they backed off. When they did that, when they backed off, they later on had a conversation and they were told that it was a civilian who did it. And that was the end of the story. So they were either a backup or they were there for an alternative scenario. Now that alternative scenario may have involved this. There was a group there in 2 rooms of the motel called the Invaders, same level as Dr. King. They were there to help for the march. They were there to work cooperatively with Dr. King because the march before, on the 28th, had been broken up. And they had been blamed for that. They didn't do it. The march was broken up by provocateurs, most of whom came from Chicago, the members of the Blackstone Rangers. Some came out of St. Louis. But they were brought in specifically for that purpose. Provocateurs were used by the government, all kinds of things. When at Dr. King's request, I headed the National Conference for New Politics. That was an umbrella organization that was to bring all together all of the peace and freedom groups in the nation. We held a conference in Chicago at the Palmer House, and on Labor Day 1967, that conference was broken up by a black caucus that was formed by Blackstone Rangers and provocateurs. You remember that? Yeah. It became a disaster, drove all of the potential money away from the movement and just splintered it, made it ineffective. And we didn't know at the time what happened. We were very naive in those days of the extent that government goes to this sort of thing. But the Invaders were the Black Panthers, effectively, of Memphis, but they were local community organizing guys. And they could be very helpful, and they were there to help Dr. King. Then all of a sudden, what happened? About 5:45 on the 4th of April, 16 minutes before the shot, there's a knock on the door. The Invaders were told, you have to leave. Because the King organization, S.C.L.C, is no longer going to pay your bill. You're not needed. You have to go. And they're nonplussed. What is this? They've been having good meetings. They've been working well with S.C.L.C, with Hosey and Jim Orange. And they said, what's going on? But if they don't want us, fine. We'll just... And they were armed, by the way, because they were always armed in self-defense. Then we're just quiet, we'll go. But as they were getting ready, he got a second thought. As he had a second thought, he said, to the woman at the door, well, who was it who gave you these instructions that we should go? Because it's a bit silly. 5:45 at night, when do you pay your hotel bill? I mean, this room's already been paid for. Now they don't want to pay our bill. I mean, you've got to go now. Yes, now. Well, who gave you this instruction? He said, well, Brother Jackson. Reverend Jackson gave us this.
That's right.
Reverend Jackson gave us this instruction. Reverend Jackson, he had nothing to do with that group. Why would he give that instruction? Over the shoulder of the woman, you see Reverend Jackson down in the parking lot looking at his watch. And they thought that was very funny. But anyway, strange. But they packed up their things and they left the hotel. Now, one possibility might well have been that this was a tough group, angry group, militant group. Maybe they would get angry enough to start a ruckus right there in the hotel, and maybe it would explode into a violent situation, and maybe that could be a cover for shots that could come from goodness knows where and hit goodness knows who. Because Martin King would come out on the balcony about, 8 or 9 minutes later at that time. Anyway, the Invaders left. There is the scenario. 2 snipers, man in the bushes, spotter with him, Jowers with him, and James Earl Ray running around trying to get his car fixed. Now, there's something else that was going on. There were 2 photographers on the roof of the fire station. There were 2 photographers. They were military photographers. They're psychological operations guys who were assigned to go on the roof of the fire station that afternoon and photograph everything. So the actual killing of Martin King was photographed. There are photographs of it. They had two cameras. One was aimed at the balcony, and the other was aimed at the parking lot. And at the time of the shot, the guy who had the camera in the parking lot swept it up through the bushes, because that's where the shot came from, and he caught the shooter, lowering his rifle at that point in time. Those photographs still exist. We negotiated to try to buy them for 1.5 years. And my intermediary made a mistake at one point, and he used his own name going into Miami, and the FBI had a watch list. And he was followed to a meeting point, which was in an open area with one of the photographers. And one of the FBI agents stuck a long lens camera out the car window as they were talking, and the photographer saw it and got spooked and just took off. He lives in Costa Rica, and I don't know that he's ever come out of Costa Rica since. We lost that opportunity. On New Year's Day, 1996, New Year's Day, after Orders to Kill was published in '95, Steve Tompkins got a call from a man called Colonel John Downey. Colonel Downey was the head of the 902nd Military Intelligence Group that is in the bowels of the Pentagon. It is the blackest, most covert operative group in America. One of the things that the snipers told us was that the King involvement, the King case, was just another hit for them. That they had been sent during the riots of '67 to Newark, Tampa, Los Angeles with mug books. Mug books were pictures of community leaders who had to be killed, who were sponsoring community activities. So there was this pattern of killing that had gone on and been covered up for virtually during that whole period of time. Remember, in '67, '68, there were over 100 riots in American cities. This country was on fire. France almost faced a revolution in its street, in the streets of Paris. So there was a great deal of uneasiness and fear that this was going to erupt in a conflagration. So they set about the business of killing people. One shouldn't be surprised at that, but that is what they did. This man called, supposedly, Steve. He said, "I've read Pepper's book. He basically is right, but you've given me too much credit. I was only following orders." Now, effectively, he was the coordinator of all aspects of the assassination of Martin King, in my view. This was a task force operation involving special forces, psychological operations, military intelligence, and organized crime. At that very time, the 902nd Military Intelligence Group was involved in a joint venture with Carlos Marcello's New Orleans mob, the sale of guns, rifles, ammunition into Latin and South America. What happened was, during that time, guns, rifles, ammunition were being stolen from American bases and camps and armories. They were trucked into Marcello's area in New Orleans, and then they were put on a flatboat around in the Gulf and taken off in Houston by guess who? Raul and his guys. Repackaged and sold into Latin South America. The split was 50-50 to the mob and to the 902nd. That was their black operations money. That's what that was all about. So they had that relationship all along. They had that relationship. It was clear. James O'Ray was given the name of Eric S. Galt as his identity. That was an identity he used all the time. He would never reveal who gave him or how he got that name. And this is the typical mentality that James had of a person who's been in jail. He was never going to give up anybody he thought was trying to help him. He would not involve him. And he actually thought to the end that the guys who gave him that name, Eric S. Galt, were helping him with that identity. What he didn't realize was there was a real Eric S. Galt. And he worked at as a warehouse manager at Union Carbide outside of Toronto, Canada. And that Union Carbide and Eric S. Galt in particular had national security agency clearance, and he was involved in illegal operations with the American Defense Department particularly in terms of transferring proximity fuses and other classified items to Israel at the time. So there was a link then between MI, the Military Intelligence Group, and Union Carbide and Eric S. Gold, that became James's identity, and a link between the mob and military intelligence. So Downey says to Steve, look, I'd like to set the record straight. I don't want to meet with Pepper. I'll meet with you, just like you did with the other guys, and answer questions. So they start meetings. And we started the meetings in Bermuda. I said we because I went undercover and I stayed in a safe area, and Steve would come to me after. And he described Downey. And as it turns out, the man, John Downey, had died a number of years before, in 1988, supposedly. He did say to Tom Gazzopa, now they're going to tell you I'm dead, if you do any checks, but they give me a new identity and I'm alive and I live in Costa Rica. And to this day, one of the questions, we continued these interviews. At one point, it got to be contentious. It got to be contentious because I was set up on an ABC program by some of our network friends. I did an interview, and I had said in the first book that the leader of the team was dead. And we thought he was dead because all of the investigators, and at various times we had 200 people working on this case, thought this guy was dead. They couldn't find trace of him anywhere. He was from Birmingham, Alabama. And what had happened was he wasn't dead. He was alive. And he had actually killed 2 people in bar fights. And he had been convicted, done time on 1, and then he just left the jurisdiction, and then he was gone. And the Army found him, and they brought him back up. And when I went on this television program, I said, "Are you sure he's dead?" He said, "Yeah, everything I know, he's dead. He's dead." So I said, "Well, how would you like to meet?" And they bring him out, of course, on nationwide network television. Here's this guy, Billy Ray Edson, who I said is dead. I said, "I'd never name anybody if he's alive. I named him because I was dead." Well, out he comes, and he sits down, and I said, "Gee, you know, to the television guys, if you had not wanted your quick hit, your cheap shot, we could have made this a really interesting program. I could have brought documents and materials, and Mr. Heinz and I could have had a really interesting conversation for the benefit of the American people. But you weren't interested in that. You wanted your cheap shot, didn't you?" You know, the guy, of course, got very sort of upset about that. Yeah. So I think, without any question, that is in my mind, the structure of it. I published it in detail, down to the end of what we know now in a book called Active State. It's certainly complicated, but it was an active state. It was official, in my view, and they took away this and denied this nation of this great prophet and the world of this great prophet. And we wonder today how he would have felt, what he would have thought in terms of what he sees, what we see going on in the world today. Because his worst fears have come true. You know, he's called a dreamer. And in many ways that's a slight. Because he was not a conventional dreamer. He was a dreamer who was open-eyed. He dreamt by day, not by night. And dreamers of the day are the most dangerous people of all time. Because they may act on their dreams. And that's what Martin King was doing. And that is the great loss to all of us. Thank you. It's my role here. I've taken much too long, but I don't know how to cover all this in a brief time. But it's my role to introduce people now who have various aspects, that work on various aspects of this case. So I want to introduce Steve Coakley, who with Eric Muhammad has spent a lot of time in recent years working with. Eric.
I really appreciate everybody taking some time to be here in this room. If you have a chance, go call a friend, use your cell phone. Next 30, 60 seconds, you got somebody that's upstairs in the room, tell them to come down. We're going to break some fresh ground here for a few minutes, and I want to be fair and respectful to the other people who've come a long way to participate here for this program, and I know I came a long way to be here, and I'm real excited. There'll never be enough time to get to all of the things that are deeply relevant about what we're trying to say. I got some things that'll be on the overhead, a few that'll be on video, some of the things that Mr. Pepper has said, some of the things that Mr. Melanson has worked on, some of the things that Mr. Garrison represented, will be some of the things that I'll translate for you, our people, in a way that we can most easily digest the dynamic of those issues. All of these men have contributed in such an awesome way, and it's pieces of each of what we have to say that make a whole picture. We have never had the opportunity to be woven together.
Right.
There have been attempts in the past to convene assassination conventions, but many times some of the least known of us, especially those who are black, are not recognized by most of the quote conspiracy theorists, but I'm a server of African people. In my process of serving my people, I'm more known as somebody who speaks about the dynamic of the world power. When I come to talk to my people, when I was here in Memphis, or I'm in Atlanta, or I'm in Oakland, or I'm in LA, or Cincinnati, or San Francisco, or Dallas, or Houston, I'm known as the guy who has to translate the dynamic of the investment bankers, the commercial bankers, the Bank of International Settlements, the IMF, the World Bank, the Trilateral, the GATT, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberger Group, the World Affairs Council, the RAND Corporation, the Brookings Institute, the American Enterprise Institute. It's my responsibility to translate those things. World centralization of white power brought us here today. We're here because someone was assassinated, and this was not the only person who was assassinated in the program for world control. Right. The Bush family has a political dynasty that the Kennedy family was not allowed to have. In this program for world control, something we're getting ready to talk about right now, this is hardcore serious. This is denied the educated. This is denied the speculators. The aura about, quote, the word conspiracy is worse than boo-boo on toilet paper. Right. They don't want the children to invest in looking at how did the world end up in such an awful position that people could force a war on fabricated information and the population remains impotent. So my responsibility in a quick sort of way is to tie this down. There's some loose ends. Several years ago, there was an investigation by the U.S. Justice Department. And in that investigation, they spoke of two people in an unnamed way. One named Memphis minister and another code-named S.C.L.C minister. And those two men were black men. And as a result of the work of Mr. Pepper and the King family, and Mr. Garrison and all the others at the trial and the representation, and Mr. Gregory, who's our street advocate, he's the one that keeps us connected to the people sometimes we don't get to talk to.
That's right.
He's the grand master of something that I'm a student of.
That's right.
This was I sat on the floor at my college in 1974 and watched him and Mara Clark thumb little cards showing Kennedy's head going backwards. And I wanted to do and be something just like this. And I lived long enough to grow up to stand next to the man who I sat before.
That's right. All right.
That's an honor to me as a brother and a contribution and respect for you as someone who's given me this opportunity.
All right, Steve.
All right, now.
Come on, Mr. Coach.
Here we go.
Make it plain and be
One, while we're talking about this program for world control, all of you should get the latest issue of Atlantic Monthly. There's an article in there called Supremacy by Stealth. 10 Rules in Managing the World. It's about America as a white imperial power, and they better just get on with throwing it down.
All right.
I say that because this could only happen after the assassinations. This could only happen after the assassinations. And that's a very important thing for all of us to put in context. Brother, turn on that first overhead. On your program, there's a picture from the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. That's on your program. That picture is on your program, and superimposed on the picture is young Martin and his father's faces surrounding that moment. And this is a very difficult thing to do as someone, as a servant, to speak about people who are here or in the aura of impact. But it's my job to call it as I see it. I'm the name the names guy. Tonight we're going to name them real fast.
That's right.
All right.
That's right.
That picture is a false picture. It's a lie. Everything about that picture helped everything that we stand against happen. If they had not started that initial misdirection of that way, all the other bundles and James O'Ray on a bathtub, sticking out of a window that he couldn't have possibly shot from, all of that happened because of that moment. And that moment was instigated by a man named Miriam McCullough. Because when you get down to ask everybody, why did you point in that damn direction? They say, well, the guy sitting there said, I know where the shot came from. It came from over there. I was in the military. And he had been in the military, but he was still in the military. That's what he didn't say. And he was working under the cover of Memphis. What's the damn utility company here? Yeah, y'all ought to have a month for not paying them, pay them late for having financed and fronted for the snitch that helped kill Martin King. No utility company provided a cover. That meant that somebody in their payroll department had to write the phony check. And he was useful to the group because he could drive a car. All right. That woman on the balcony, that first woman, there's no reason for her to be there. It's 6 o'clock in the evening, and she's there because she's cleaning up the room down the hall where the invaders were located. Ooh. And what's important about that is that checkout time is 12 noon. What's the checkout time here in the Marriott?
12.
You can't sit around till no 6 at night, can you?
That's right.
So it was suspicious that at 6 at night somebody went to get these boys out the room, but they was drunk, getting high, and had guns. And as soon as somebody wiped them out to the right, somebody came up the left and knocked on the damn door. And that was the Memphis minister. The S.C.L.C. minister was blamed for getting those boys out the room. And due to the power of this man and due to the strength of this family, they went to the Justice Department and asked for an investigation based on certain pieces of new evidence.
That's right.
Now, I wasn't big on that Wilson thing, and I see the family wasn't either. He wanted to help. That's all cool. That adds some fluff in there. Let them go chase some stuff while we focus on some other things. But in the process of saying what the Justice Department said, which is that there's no need for any further investigation ever in the history of the world on the King thing. That's what they said. And they said about 15 damn times. They spoke against Melanison. They spoke against Pepper. They spoke against Judge Joe Brown, who did the ballistics test, and I swear to God, the Black Caucus, he said it resembled a handgun. We talking about 2 holes in Martin's face. You ain't never heard a discussion about 2 people. In Pepper's book, he follows Ernestine Campbell, who says she sees the S.C.L.C. minister take his hand down and put something in the tote bag. I got Don Rose, a civil rights activist in Chicago, who met Jesse and took him to the Today Show the next day.
That's right.
And he said Jesse was still holding this tote bag in his hand, and it wasn't the shirt. This ain't about the bloody shirt. It is not a crime to lie about whose blood is on your shirt. It is not a crime to lie about whether you clutched him at the end or whether you didn't. So don't get caught all up in that. That ain't going nowhere. Right? People in trauma do very traumatic things.
That's right.
And Andy spoke to the fact that he could be sane and reasonable about the fact that Ralph scooped the blood and Jesse put his hands in and rubbed it on his shirt, but they were traumatized. Ralph cried when he saw them cut Martin's head open in the autopsy. He said, that's not my buddy there anymore. That's just the remains of his body. But you can feel, I feel when I read and I hear the hurt of the family as us as victims who have continuously allowed ourselves to be assassinated without retaliation. I ain't talking about calling no court or no police.
All right.
I'm talking about they'll stop killing black people when black people show they will hurt who's ever involved. That we have a little assassination prevention bureau. And if you don't think it can happen, it just happened to Brother Khalid Abdul Muhammad.
That's right.
This brother was killed at 53 years old under the guise of natural causes. And he's the blackest militant brother we had. He's gone, ain't even a suspect.
That's right.
No such thing. So excuse me a minute while I'm serious about this. I have children I want to live till they get tired.
That's right.
I want children's children to have an opportunity. And adults, you owe it to these babies.
Right.
Right.
We got to quit yoking with this thing.
That's right.
There are secret societies that run the White House, Skull and Bones. And the one before him was Clinton, a Rhodes Scholar. And the one before him was Skull and Bones. There. Clinton went to Yale. Hillary go to Yale. Lieberman went to Yale. Curry damn other school up in here? Can't nobody be in the White House from Memphis State? So this is a serious thing, but let me put this thing in context. It was the killing of the charismatics. They were white and they were black. Norman Lincoln Rockwell was just as electrifying as George Wallace was.
That's right.
He was electrifying white people to the point that the damn Wallace carried Indiana. That's when they shot his ass, when the Southern guy won in the North.
That's right.
Nixon had them same boys. How many of you all saw the movie Bad Boys 2? Watch it now, it's tricky, because in there, rescuing the two brothers is a group called Alpha 66. They snuck Alpha 66 on our people like they rescuing Martin Lawrence and Will Smith. And these are racist, Bay of Pig, exile, murderers, gun runners, ruthless little thieves we've been chasing all over the planet. You don't know about these wars we have with these people. The Fish is Red, the little gun runner crew, Gary Hennings and the others. I'll tell you some shit that lasts all night. Y'all got all night?
Yeah.
I ain't gonna be talking all night for right here.
Yeah.
But just the fact that we are here, we'll have the opportunity to talk all night if you're concerned that way about your children. I'll only speak from this podium for so long in respect of all the other people involved.
That's all
I
right.
worked very hard all my life. I have nothing. I have no car,
That's
no
right,
house.
Steve.
I got about 9 teeth. Now, if I tell the truth and I got 9 teeth, will you still believe it?
Tell them about
If I
the
show what I say is true, and I walk out here and they say that damn Coakley talking all that shit ain't got 9 teeth, will you still say, but I saw him show something and I believe what he said, and I'm going to take a look for myself?
That's right.
Come on,
I
tell the
wonder
story.
why you would speak against it. But that's all the reasons why we don't want to make it happen, because we got all little disqualifiers, because that's going to stop it from being right. Okay,
Come on, Steve.
couple of cleanup things.
That's all
FBI would gradually develop somebody. We all thought it was Jesse Jackson. It was not. They blamed it on Samuel Pierce. When we look at the memos, look at the level of redactions, it's 1 letter more than the word Pierce. The real man's name is Samuel Proctor. Write that down because it's very important. Samuel Proctor was quoted in one of the books called Jesse's Merlin. President of North Carolina A&T, deputy director of the Peace Corps in the early 60s, head of Applecina Baptist Church after Adam Clayton Powell. Come on now, look up in here. Peace Corps was so much the CIA did that they shut the damn thing down, didn't open up again till Carter brought it back.
That's right.
It was such a spot there. So we take a look at that. Pierce said to the day he died, he wasn't but an attorney. He was a military attorney. He was a state's attorney. He was a U.S. attorney. He was a corporate attorney. He was head of HUD under Reagan. He said, not only was I not that person, but I've never even been to a protest in my life. When Pierce was dying at Suburban Hospital in Silver Spring, Maryland, we standing right there with a tape recorder, giving him one last chance to say it was him. He said, hell no, it wasn't him, and grabbed my hand like that. He died 2 days later. No, that's not the point. He wasn't the guy. That was the point. It was Proctor, not Pierce. That was the point. Okay, brother, put on the next overhead real quick. I appreciate you helping me too.
We with you, Steve. Come on.
All right. This, turn it the other way. This is just a little piece. You can barely see it, but just that little heading, it says, surrender by consent. It says, and we will have a world government, whether you, what's that word over there say? Whether you like it or not. That's James Warburg testifying before the Senate. You can pull it off. He says that we up to something that if you don't want it, we're going to make you have it anyway. You have to assess the power of the Warburg family. This is the cover of the current Atlantic Monthly that I asked you to get because it overtly advocates what can only have happened after you killed all the people who can make it different. John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Malcolm and Martin. These are charismatics. These are extraordinary people who can make you move in masses and forget about the burdens of the day. I heard someone in the hallway. You said, let's go to Washington and do it again. They said, can I get back to work by Monday? You know, on Sunday, we start ironing clothes and making lunch because we respect the time we give them. We didn't spend a day getting ready for them. And we work against our own people and suffocating sometimes what they do to us. But that's that cover. Look for that magazine. There's important things in there that you need to know. And they said we need to be like 2nd century Rome. That's right. All I know about Rome is that it fell. All right, let's go. Next one. Flip one more side. For the little people. That's a flyer like I'm using up in Oakland. Pawns linked together. Don't think we can't beat this thing. Pawns can win a game of chess. If any of you all in here play chess, chess has 3 phases: opening, middle, and end game. The way I play chess, I set my pawns up where they unite early. Now, don't no bishop want to go down messing with no pawn. See, I call the bishops the church. So say Jesse Jackson, I've accused, I will lay out a foundation of a discussion that will include his name. He has had opportunities to confront me about my allegations, but he considers himself a bishop. I'm a pawn. If you playing chess, ain't no 3-point bishop gonna go down on no 1-point pawn. So he goes around. So though they don't think we so little, we control the flow of the board, because don't nobody want to go down with no pawn. And because we link together, if you take one of us, we'll take your ass back. Now, in the game of chess, now think this through, because you have to tell this to your children when they think it's impossible. You bring up the role a pawn has in the chess game. In that mid-game, we trade away the leaders. The knights, who are the secret societies, move 2 up and 1 over. They make an angle. That's secret society. They're on their board. They run this government. That's right. They run this government. The bishops are the churches. 1 white and 1 black. Today they arguing over whether it's gays, not over it was an assassination or not. They have spent more time in Minnesota talking over sexuality than they have the impact of the evil of the devil they claim to fight. That's right. So let you watch it on the news tonight as they argue over whether they can or whether they can't. It's socially insignificant to the power of the ruthless people that are running the world. But the pawns linked together in the end game, united, can re-empower themselves, change their names, take a higher rank, and checkmate the king. It is possible. Pawns linked together can make it work. I have to say that to African people. That's right. When you finish, they say, well, what you going to do? That's right. How's it going to work? And I can lay that analogy out, and they can miss it. That's Somebody can say, go down Moses, and miss it. That's it isn't for everybody. That's right. Everybody can't hear it. There's a hierarchy to understanding here. And we have to adhere to it. All right, next one, quick. So I'll get to help these other people. Okay, now this is a little document. You see all them little dots, them little lines? That's the word I. That's Al Sharpton. That's Al Sharpton's book. Go tell it on the mountain. I got inspired by Sharpton to reinvestigate the King assassination when I started seeing this. I thought this was interesting. He said, I believe. I graduated, I was, I would, I acted, I saw, I am, I was, I was, I was, I saw, I tried, me. Look at that sheet, mine. Oh, here we go again. And at the end of all of that, he said, Jesse Jackson is my teacher, and Ralph Abernathy was jealous of Jesse, and it pissed me off. Because that was a bit of arrogance. I love Brother Al. Al and I talk. I did a cable show bringing this up, and I made my accusations. And Jesse saw it. He told Sharpton, why did he inspire me to do it? He said he was pissed off. He wasn't inspired. And Sharpton came to me and said what he said about it. I thought Jesse Jr. was going to be here. Jesse Jr. has seen my analysis of the King assassination. And he has come to me at the Black Caucus and said, my brother, I appreciate in the tape that you said, I am the Jackson who speaks to you freely and without hesitation. He said in regards to the allegations of the Reverend, he will have to defend himself. Whoa. That's very important. That's metaphysically very important. Done in a tasteful way, that is the document you'll have to fight. You can't fight me. I've been fought before, and Dorothy, I've been fought. You had to fight me too, didn't you? Oh, yeah. We fought over white people. Yeah, that's good. You nationalist, and I'm S.C.L.C. Hey, well, S.C.L.C. is nationalist too. I'm S.C.L.C. I'm in the ACP. We won now. I'm in the ACP. We black. We was one. We ain't never not been one. Can't nobody get in between us when we have a purpose, and with a purpose, we have a plan. All right, next one. J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover. He had a role in all of this. J. Edgar Hoover was pathologically insecure. When he got all up in hearing who was doing what in the bedroom, it was because he was a sick, deviant bastard. Excuse my language. It's all right. He was sick. He was sick. And he wore women's clothes. And we called him J. Edgar Hoover. Next one. And J. Edgar Hoover was accused of being Negro. In fact, he fought against Negroes so hard so that no white would ever think he really was one. Next one. That's his little Negro picture. Then the sister come out. CIA involved in this. CIA is involved in this. Keep going. We spend a day on that. There's a picture of John Kennedy. I use that in one of my lectures. Mysterious deaths in the New World Order. The only way it could come about was you had to kill certain people. I'm really tired of doing what happened to lectures. I did what happened to Tupac and Biggie. I'm doing what happened to Khaled. I did what happened to Harold Washington. I did what happened to Kennedy. What happened to King? What happened to Little Kennedy? What happened to Lady Di? I keep having to do what happened to somebody.
Yes.
Been selling all these tapes, but it's not the point. We got to stop the killing. I'd love to do some other lecture, like the plan or the future. Okay, that's John Kennedy's brain. That's a little hook in the upper left corner. That's a little piece of his head being stuck back on so they can fabricate that the shooter was behind instead of on the front. And that's very important. That's John Kennedy's face for real on the autopsy table. Next flip. You couldn't kill Martin till you killed Malcolm.
That's right.
It's an important thing about the militant and the moderate.
That's right.
The desire of high-impact charismatic means you had to kill them both.
That's
They
right.
didn't differentiate whether it was S.C.L.C. or
That's
black
right.
nationalists.
That's right.
They did them both, Dorothy.
Get them both. You're right.
They did them both. All right, it's impact, not label.
That's right.
Next one. Double cross, the mafia's role in the killing. Mr. Pepper mentioned it. Put up, that's Sam Giancana's nephew writing a book about Sam Giancana, and I'm from Chicago. We out in L.A. messing around, got the police chief into saying that killing the organized crime is really all right. Bratton from New York. It's really all right because that's a little street killing is for nothing. At least when the mafia kill, they kill for a reason. Business, enforcement. It's okay. So he's out there pumping that and chasing down the little youth. Show the next piece what Sam Giancana said about how his role. Now you might not see that, but right down there where that little star is, he said we helped out Hoover. Now, he said we helped out Hoover many times cooling down that nigger Shine King. And that's the mafia boys' conversation about helping Hoover undermine an African person. That's very important. Next one. And that's, of course, this is from William Pepper's book. He's got good dramatic things in his book. In fact, that's William Pepper up there in the upper right with James Earl Ray. But that's Lamberto right there. And that's the mafia connection to Marcello's. That's New Orleans, and damn, from Memphis to New Orleans, it's a straight shot. That's about the gangster thing. And Marcello's you can find in 2 assassinations. Next shot. Now, some people say when I talk to young black children, many times I talk to the young white children at Cornell and Notre Dame and University of Minnesota, and I can walk you around those spots. But that's a white man's book. I used to offer $100 for anybody who could find this book. This book is Agnew about why he resigned so Ford could be vice president to be president. He made Rockefeller the unelected vice president. Agnew says that Al Haig came to him one day and said, if you don't leave, I will kill you. And Agnew wrote the book, Go Quietly, ... or else how Al Haig would have killed him if he didn't leave, because Al Haig proved to him they can operate like that. Next one, real quick. Let me hurry. Okay. That right there is Andy Young's book, An Easy Virgin. Read Andy's book. He got a great chapter called Let's Slay the Dreamer. What Andy says is it wasn't just Martin who got killed. He said about 10 or 15 key world anti-war activists got killed during that period. You might know these names better than me, because I didn't know some of the names. I don't know some of the names, but I'm sure y'all might remember them. Merton, Thomas Merton, Bernard Fall. Andy mentions a whole slew of people who were killed during that period. And that's very important. Next one. This guy right here, Carol Quigley, he wrote a book. He said between the years 62 and 64, every leader in the world changed but 3. And that, you know, Castro was still there, and China was still there, and one more. But you know what? That same thing is going on right now. Go take a paper and take the last year. It's 189 countries. See how many of them changed leadership in the last 2 years. It's very important. It's going on all over. We use Carol Quigley. He spoke at a program. Next one. He spoke at a program for world control. We use Quigley because he's a good white source. Because sometimes when I be saying it, you don't believe it. Or when I show a good white guy, show it with a lot of good white credibility, it adds weight to the evidence.
Right on, Steve.
And it ends up with who rules America, not who owns it. Same Rockefellers. Same family still running the country. It's now who runs the country is all they're arguing over. Next one. And that led to a little crisis in black leadership. Moderation or revolution, what's the difference between a protest and a hotest? Next one. Because see, then we start selling the struggle. See, Martin and them show up to fight somebody and they say, how much you want? And he said, I ain't into that, I want you to change it. He said, well, the last guy asked for money.
Yes.
Now y'all think I'm kidding? But that's the way the thing works. I'm from Chicago, I saw the shakedown work. They shake down every major white corporation, and then when you go to attack them for something they did to you, those Negroes show up to block you. Okay, this will be gradually developed. Okay, here we go. This is the Justice Department report. And this report came out on my website, stevecopeland.com. You can hit up the report. Better than hitting up the Justice Department website because everything is counted. I guess they can count mine too. I ain't really into the internet. But this Justice Department report, June 2000, is the question of perjury and conspiracy to cover up. Now that's my key point here that I want to share with you today is this right here. Next one. Out of this report was a result, turn sideways. Mr. Pepper got these pictures together, and one of those people in that picture is Raul. And he showed that with other people to many other people, and they confirmed that that was him on that sheet of paper, that lower right-hand side. That's important because, put the next sheet up, because Raul has a history. There we go. Miss Grable one day in that picture pointed to the man in the arrow that, hey, that was Raul. And you know who's standing right there next to him? Lee Harvey Oswald. And the guy on the right side, CIA. The guy on the left side, Duncan, CIA. And under the caption, it says that this guy standing next to Oswald appears to have been helping him over the last weeks. There's been no attempt by the U.S. government to establish his identity, even though he has a key role in the assassination. That's very important. That's cross-pollination. The Justice Department denied there was cross-pollination. But there's 5 captions like this in 5 books saying the same thing. This man never been investigated. And Pepper gets in front of a white woman. She says, there he is right there. And it's sort of not what the focus is on the little media thing. You kind of just see her hold that picture up. Now, I already had it. Next one.
Don't see with your bad self.
The bullets. Judge Joe Brown seems to say it's a discrepancy between a handgun and a rifle. There are 2 holes in Martin King's face. Everybody agreed. They said that it's 2 holes because it went through his jaw, then it went some space, and then went into his neck. I ain't buying that. And everybody starts off their conversation with 1 shot. And this is from William Pepper's book, very important. And I probably sold a lot of copies of your book, man. Even the one orders of the state, man. I mean, I'm an advocate of our people getting the critical information. And there, on that right side, is the bullet in Martin King's back. That's his actual body. And there above are also 3 slugs. Now, where did the long slug and the 3 slugs come from? That's a whole nother discussion. We had a long discussion on that. Flip that. Okay, can't see that from here. This is Justice Department report. I can tell you right here. Now, here we go. Look at me. I'll do this way. Mr. Pepper mentioned something about the invaders. And he was explaining that it was significant that the invaders were taken out of their rooms 15 minutes before the assassination.
That's right.
Now, in that Justice Department report, those 2 unnamed people, and the Justice Department says they're not going to name these 2 people because having investigated them and found them not guilty, they're not going to name them. But the 2 people emphatically were the Reverend Billy Cowles and the Reverend Jesse Jackson.
That's right.
And it took a lot of courage on behalf of the family, the King family, to go to a third party and ask them to litigate against what is alleged in the black community as friends. Well, I saw Billy Cowles last night. I thought it was very courageous for him to show. I saw he sort of stayed a little off the cuff, stayed in the back row, didn't quite push. As people started talking about where they were that night, he didn't get too into it. He stayed back there. He went on out that side door and kept on going. That was very significant. A lot of pressure on Martin to come to this town and face preachers who may or may not have assisted his father.
All right, now.
It took a lot of courage to come here.
That's right. All right, Steve, that's right.
When you go out on a point like that, that's when the hardcore show up to back it up, right? Because we know it's true. And I used to mess with Dick about this. Dick ain't here for this moment. You know this is his moment. It would be pathological sometimes. Me and Dick might be together in the morning on the LA radio talking about the conspiracy to kill King. And we might say Jesse didn't do something too good. Then that night, Jesse might come to town and Dick and Jesse eat dinner together or something.
But he ain't there.
No, but Dick has that ability. See, what makes Dick so valuable is that he can be in all these places and get all access to. Dick told me something about Kobe Bryant I didn't see in the paper till today. He told me a week ago. The press finally decided to print that he had multiple incidents. I had to make a day to talk about the woman, and how he was come back from Denver, and the other woman, and the other woman, and all of them had physical problems and needed medical care.
Oh, yes.
I don't know where the wife was, but that's a weakness too. Anytime we weak for the flesh, and I'll tell you something. I'm gonna tell you something. I'm gonna be honest about this. I'm gonna be honest about this. I don't support people when they don't support the people they love.
That's right.
I'm gonna say this, listen. I'm out there activating. People say, brother, I'm with you, and brother, I'm with you, and then I see them cheat on their sister. Now that means that the person they love, I know they can never do for me what they're going to do for that person.
That's right.
I'm less to them than that person. So I put great weight in that. So when we're looking for extraordinary moral authority, we got to play the game straight to get the extra power.
That's right.
We got to play the game straight. There's no other way to do this. You got to be honest about it. I respect these men for their integrity. When the pressure came, none of them ran. They didn't run from other white people who were pressuring them for helping us.
That's right.
Who could call the mafia to get D.Gregory? He didn't call the police. He didn't call the Air Force. He called the ones who can do it, and everybody step back and say unsolved mafia murder. And I know how that worked. I'm from Chicago. Okay, last point, because I'm out of here. I got to respect the other people. Whether or not, this is very significant, I think I can prove this now. I have a tape of an interview with Billy Kyles that Brother Eric and I did at the Black Caucus in 2001. Now, we had built up a lot of pressure to have a street corner conference on King to build a consensus for a stronger investigation. We bumped into Billy Kyles and we pulled him to the side, and because he's quoted as Memphis minister, it was important to ask him what was it like to be investigated as a conspiracy to murder guy. I mean, I want to know. In fact, why didn't the black press not do one single story that the family stood up against a friend to make an allegation? Not one single black paper in this country carried the allegation nor the conclusion. And Jackson, to his cleverness, he didn't, when the report came out, he asked for more information. He wanted more of this. He looked concerned. But what was key about that was he never brought up. See, I'd be offended if I didn't do it. That my if D.Gregory said I attempted to kill his lovable, my strong friend's son, Christian, who brought me to Morgan State, helped me get the Boule book. If he said I accused Christian of something and I didn't do it, hell, I'd be all over Dick trying to make clear I didn't do that.
That's right.
And to be accused and to be investigated and to say not a word to no one takes patience and complicity.
Yeah.
That's what it takes. Because you don't want to crack the worm open. Jackson won't confront me about the conversation. We built up the consensus. Bam, 911 came and everybody got off the hook. Because at that point, I put down who killed King to deal with all of that other stuff going on. And I was in Washington watching white people run all over trying to get out of there because it was going to be the State Department. They were running. People go, man, I think they go. And all the white people got in one little line and went out in one little street getting out of all that trouble. Stayed in traffic for 6 hours. I've been driving all up about Washington Mountain and trying to get out of there. Okay, last thing. This Justice Department report says, and I know it's hard to see, you wouldn't probably see any of it from there. It says Memphis minister, in fact it mentions Mr. Melanson in the paragraph earlier. Philip Melanson, a professor and author, testified that the Memphis Police Inspector Sam Evans, deceased, told him he ordered tactical units away from the Lorraine at the request of Memphis minister associated with Martin King. In addition, other witnesses testified about their belief that the eviction of the invaders, a group of young Memphis African-American activists. Now I got a thing to say about the invaders. I did a little look, and there's a Justice Department document in January where Cabbage and another guy goes to the damn Justice Department and say, look at us, we're going to be real active come later on. That's a little suspicious to me. That made me a little uncomfortable. I'm a little uncomfortable about Charles Cabbage. I've come here several times looking for him. Right. When the Justice Department, when Pepper gets 2 guys, Izzy Harrington and Charles Ballard to say Jesse got him out the room, the government doesn't go to the two guys who made the comment.
That's
they
right.
go to a third guy. They go to the third guy so they don't get the damn right answer. And the third guy says, I didn't say I knew who it was. Hell, I didn't know. And they said, obviously it didn't happen because he don't know. And then they exonerated somebody. And then the S.C.L.C minister, when investigated, said, I never could have gotten the invaders out of that room because I didn't know they were even in the hotel. And I thought you was going to get them in your book. I was looking, I got right to that spot. But that's my job. It's hard for you as a white man to talk against a black man and still be considered non-offensive to a neighborhood. That's very important. That's a very delicate thing to do. If I was sitting amongst the Kennedys talking about who killed them, that would be a very delicate thing to do as a black guy with all white people. So it takes like surgery. So here we go.
Go, Steve.
Here we go. Billy Kyles fabricates what time he gets to the door. Mr. Pepper left all his work in the King Center. I have the benefit of looking at some of his raw work, and in there was the informant's list of times, and at 5:51, Kyles knocks on the door. Contrary to 5 o'clock. It's very important that he push the time out so he doesn't get into the left, so there's a right, so there's a hit. Move them out on the left, on the right, come up on the left, pull him out, knock him out. But you gotta freeze him on the balcony, and it took a series of left, right, left. The night Malcolm was killed, they said if they were searching, they wasn't gonna do it. But they didn't search and they did it. So sometimes that one little moment, Malcolm could have landed in Paris. Dean Russ, Rockefeller Rhodes Scholar, wouldn't let him. He ended up going to New York. He got killed 6 days later. That's very, very important. Next one, flip the next one. Keep going through there. But I can say this. So here goes the government department logic. We found nothing in Melanison's hearsay about Memphis minister was specific to the removal of tactical units. Now they established that Sam Evans said that Kyles was ignorant. You kind of come off of it a little bit, say, oh, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. And in fact, it was said that Kyles was a Memphis Police Department informant. But when Posner does his chapter on Kyles, his little footnotes, he says Kyles not an FBI informant. He wasn't accused of that. See, you got to learn how they come up with no information because the computation is faulty. You don't multiply fractions by adding. You got to break them down to the least common denominator. Then go forward. Well, they do all this. Since Jackson didn't know they were in the hotel, he obviously couldn't have got them out of there. So we see Billy Kyles walking down the aisle at the Black Caucus. Brother Eric got his tape.
That's right.
I got some insight, and we pull him to the curb, and we say, Billy, damn, man, how you doing? It's just after 911, many people didn't come to the Black Caucus then. Said, Billy, how you doing? Fine, fine. The man, we be laughing about you doing that preacher talk. I'm about preacher talk. We said, what do preachers talk about? Sex, money, cars. We laughed. Okay, here we go. We said, Kyles, what about that being investigated? Oh, it was that Peppers. It was that Peppers. We in Peppers for money. It's Peppers. Peppers wanted me to lie. Peppers this and Peppers that. Okay, fine. You could have been there last night. I would have been interested to see how he would have reacted. And then we said, well, Mr. Kyles, a meeting. Did you have a meeting in the hotel with the invaders? See, the day before, there was a meeting of the invaders and some of King's staff.
That's right.
And this is very important. In fact, can you authenticate that for me? Is that document look familiar to you? It's a government. It mentions sources, and it's got confidential at the bottom. It was in your stuff. In your stuff. I be in all of my folks' stuff. So I can bring it to you and make it a part of our considerations from our stuff.
Yes.
This is, we're integrated at best. And this document says that it was a meeting in the hotel with the invaders and the Reverend Jesse Jackson and other members of the King's staff. Now, what's significant about this document is that in exonerating S.C.L.C minister / the Reverend Jesse Jackson, the government says, since Jackson didn't know that he was there, they were there, therefore, it couldn't possibly be true. Okay, fine. And we know of no evidence to contradict that. How come we got it and they don't?
Right.
How come we got a document stating the following? On April 3rd, Lieutenant Arkin advised that a reliable source of the police department said there was a meeting of the invaders and King staff in the Lorraine Motel. This is the address, 406 Mulberry. Said John Burrell Smith, Charles Cabbage, Charles Ballard, and Rena Harrell were all staying in the Lorraine Motel with the S.C.L.C. And it mentions a guy from Cairo, they call him Carnes, but I know that's Reverend Charles Cohen, is who they meant to say.
Oh, yeah.
See, it says, where we got this name? Carnes or Cornelius or Cairo. I know that's Reverend Cohen. Okay? From the Black Liberation Front. And it says that, it goes on to say that they had this meeting at the Lorraine on the 2nd, and the meeting was to get Reverend Lawson from being the liaison to the invaders / BOP. When they write a grant, they be BOP. Lawson was a little tight with them. So they wanted somebody else. So they wanted Kyles. So in the meeting with Jackson and others, Kyles was selected to be the new liaison. The significant thing is that Jackson was involved with the switch, which establishes him at the hotel, meeting with people who he swore under oath he didn't know were in the hotel. And tonight I raised the question of perjury. Now they mentioned in the method of the report that witnesses were advised that statements that they made could be used against them. Since the government knows of no document to contradict Jackson, and tonight we have it, what next? Second, since one would say, well, who knows what about this? We got Billy Kyles on tape saying, I set that meeting up. I don't remember if I was there, but I know Jesse was there.
That's right.
Can't get any better than personal attribution. Right. This is a street corner operation. We want to do something for our children. And to beat off the killers, give you some space to do your own New World Order. But the killers got power. They got immunity from prosecution and 100,000 investigations to protect them. Then it goes to the little part about Cabbage, and I'll finish here. Moreover, Charles Cabbage's recent trial testimony is inconsistent with his testimony at the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Now, to draw Cabbage off to be not right there is a little irrelevant because, again, he ain't one of the two guys who say it was Jackson. But I believe that what Cabbage really did without knowing who it was hurry up and get him out. I think Cabbage hurried up and got him out. And by being a part of hurrying him up and getting him out, he didn't need to know, he just needed time. You mentioned Jackson standing in the courtyard looking at his watch. Now, Bevel's running around. He's a very confused young man. James Bevel was running around saying Martin King killed himself. Said Martin King was killed because of his habits or this or that. And that's an insane accusation to make in the public in lieu of the killings that have gone on to make it all possible. It just denies history. You don't want to believe that. You was there. You know, if he was going to do it, it was all of that. Maybe there could have been some other way that happened. And then they say Cabbage's recent testimony claimed it was Reverend James Orange who evicted the invaders, telling him that S.C.L.C. minister wanted them to leave immediately. When we spoke with Orange after the trial, he told us he did not recall receiving that instruction from S.C.L.C. minister or anyone else. And we also interviewed the S.C.L.C. minister, a friend and associate of Dr. King, who led a life of public service. He denied the accusation and claimed that he did not recall that the invaders were even staying in the Lorraine. We are aware of nothing to contradict his denial. And then the key part to the report that goes on over and over again. Kyle's in a clear shot. Did you all ever see that tape? Oh. Billy Kyle said, I stepped to the side so they could get a clear shot.
That's right.
Put your seatbelt on this one.
Y'all ever seen that?
That's right.
Okay.
Show it, Steve.
To get a clear shot.
That's what he said.
Hey, check it out.
On the 6th room from the balcony. And he was talking to people in the courtyard. He stood here and I stood there. Only as I moved away so we could have a clear shot. The shot right now.
gonna tell nobody. Y'all promise not to tell?
That's right.
It's a secret. Y'all agree not to tell? Y'all agree not to tell? Hold on, we gotta go back. Okay. Y'all agree not to tell? D.Gregory gave me that tape. And Eric brought it to me. But when you get something like this, so see, this is weird. The same weekend Kyles was talking like this, hold it. Jesse Jackson went on Meet the Press. I'm going all over the country. The last week before Martin was killed, he felt a little muscle. Dorothy, Harold Washington felt muscle before he died. Right. On November 11th, they asked Harold Washington who would be the next black mayor. He said, "Ooh, that's a ghoulish question." He hit the table. He said, "I'll run it from the grave."
He sure did.
Chicago Reporter did a story in October, 3 months after Harold wins second election, who will be Chicago's next mayor? Damn, with no vacancy. Harold said, "I'll be mayor for life." Then he dies the next month.
That's right.
Anytime there's an assassination, got to study what happens right before. Prior to is very important. You never kill somebody unless you can replace it. You understand? Why kill a man, let anybody be it? So you only kill him when you got, look how long it's taken America to make somebody, because they didn't have nobody in Iraq. You see what they got to go do to make somebody? And the one they brought over there to make them, they killed their ass when they got there. That boy, Hockey, killed him up right away. Okay, somebody got to help me. Got to go back to that spot real quick. Okay, now I got one more secret to tell you. One more secret. Listen to this. Hold on, listen to this. This is that last moment when they're on the balcony. And this is counting. I mean, come on.
And all 6 were on the balcony. And he was talking to people in the courtyard. He stood here and I stood there. Only as I moved away, so we could have a clear shot. The shot right now.
So now, when they asked the Justice Department to investigate Kyles, they asked the Justice Department to investigate Kyles. Kyles' answer to that allegation is not in the report. The Justice Department spoke for him. They said it is inconceivable that Kyles would have implicated himself at a public meeting. But you don't hear what Kyles said to that. You only hear what they say. They speculate on what it is. It's one of the vision. Right here. Okay. Okay, here we go. Go in there, man. Go in there. Here we go. Watch this now. Overtime. I'm overtime. I'm in trouble. Okay. Now watch this. This is very important. Y'all know that's Mason Temple. That was where we were last night.
That's right.
It took a lot of courage to go there too. It took a lot of courage. I hate to do this like this. Martin didn't want to go. He says, "Ralph, you go." Stop it. He said, Ralph said, "No, why don't you let Jesse go?" He says, "You can take Jesse, but you cannot let him speak, Ralph. Only you can speak for me, Ralph." And then Andy says, I got Andy on tape. This tape is back there, 4 tapes set on King. I ain't into the selling, but there's only about 10 of these back there. This is where all this is located. Andy says he wanted Ralph to speak that night. I got a clip of your mother saying that he called me and he said he's going to have Ralph speak tonight.
That's right.
And then everybody goes that way. Jesse gets on Meet the Press, the same Jim Kyles made this remark. And the guy, what's the guy, the host? He superimposes that last moment. He superimposes that last moment, puts a circle around Jesse and Martin. Said, Jesse, you were close to Martin. You were there. Now, he don't say Martin turning away from him, because he's turning away from him. Jesse's the loudest one hollering at. Go ahead, go ahead. You hear it all night. Martin turns away. In Ralph's book, gotta get Ralph's book, it's very important.
That's right.
In Ralph's book, he says that when I saw that it was their crowd, I said, let's go to the telephone. Jesse says, for what? He says, if you ain't gonna make the speech, Ralph, I'm gonna make the speech. And Ralph says, I scurried to the phone. And then Martin came, and Jesse never spoke. Now, why would Meet the Press need to go back and say he was there? Because we went to all the places where the news goes and only talk to our people and build a consensus that something suspicious going on here. The white guy shows up to relieve them of the burden, even though you don't know how hard we put it on them on the corners where we live. All right, last piece. Jesse goes on Meet the Press Jesse goes on Meet the Press after this, and this is my closing. There's a tape back there, a 4-tape set on King. This is the tape that Miss McKinney got, through Brother Eric, that got the people that helped get me here. Now, I appreciate Eric and all the others that did that. And Jesse goes on Meet the Press, having said that Martin told him to make that speech the year before. He came back and got what I call cursive Meet the Press. This is a very dramatic little moment. I got other tapes back in the back. Last Days of Martin King is one tape where I try to use overheads. The 4-tape set uses videos. That's just the difference in the information. There's a lot of other stuff back there. Help me, I need your support. I'm not financed by anybody. I ain't got no money. I ain't got but 9 teeth. But this is our job. This is our purpose. This is all we live for. I've been to hell and back, and I made a pledge. If I ever get this chance, I would find out who it was that locked me down. My mamas couldn't get me out of a hospital. I was in college in 75. I said, if I get out of here alive, you know how we tell God, you just get me out of this, oh, I'm gonna do right. I find out who it was to lock me up. If I had skill, I would teach who they were. And if I had the privilege of having learned them and taught them, I wanted the right to kill them.
That's right.
I wanted the right to kill that which was the core of negativity, which is why we're having this conversation. Last piece. Curse of Meet the
and
Press.
expedited procedures. It worked, but there's been 2 commissioned.
Yeah, keep it going. Yeah, it's all right. Set it up.
Black National Security Advisor, Hispanic White House counsel. Democrats had the presidency and never did anything like that.
And that's good news, but Colin Powell comes out of a policy.
Right there, stop.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I get to sit in front of TV and do this. Kurt Holmgren and wife Erica run one of the internet's most esoteric retail businesses.
Go back. And I apologize to the other presenters for being too long. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I get to sit in front of TV and do this.
What's coming?
Kurt Holmgren and wife Erica.
Yeah, let it keep going forward. Forward.
Press play.
Okay. Don't you shrink lock.
See, and never did anything like that. And that's good news, but Colin Powell comes out of a policy.
It's no slow.
That was just a light bulb, sorry. Black Secretary of State, a black National Security Advisor, Hispanic White House counsel. Democrats had the presidency and never did anything like that. And that's good news, but Colin Powell comes out of a policy.
Here we go, slow motion.
Colin Powell comes out of a
Watch this. Hope it's dope. Watch that big eyes. Thank you very much. Got some material in the back. Stay strong, African people. We can turn this around. Thank you very much.
Stephen, thank you.